Welcome to another story made by Oracle 1. The fire had been merciless, a ravenous beast clawing through the old timber frame house like it was nothing more than kindling. When the emergency crews arrived, smoke billowed thick and black, choking the life from the air and painting the night sky with a sinister orange glow. Inside the inferno, Daniel Harper fought like a man possessed, dragging a frightened child through the choking haze, calling out for the others, desperate to save every soul trapped within. Flames licked his skin, searing pain crashing over him like a tidal wave, but he refused to relent. Then, with a suffocating burst of heat and an agonizing crack, the floor gave way beneath him, plunging Daniel into darkness. The world turned cold and silent. The fire had claimed him. But death, it seemed, was not the end for Daniel. When he awakened, the air smelled clean and unfamiliar. A steady pulse thudded in his head, but it was not the agony that should have followed his mortal injuries. He blinked against the morning light filtering into a sparsely furnished room, not his own. He sat up cautiously, noting the unfamiliar, but sturdy, hands that reached out to steady himself. Panic flared in his chest. He felt whole, healed, clean. How was this possible? The bedroom door opened and a woman entered, her face etched with concern and exhaustion. She faltered when she saw him sitting upright. "Frank? You're awake." Her voice trembled. "Frank." Daniel's heart pounded. He had never been Frank. But as the memories clawed their way forward, a shocking truth materialized. He was not in his own body. His consciousness had somehow slipped into another man's skin, a man named Frank Dalton, a firefighter who had lived just down the block. And the date on the calendar was 3 days before the fire he thought had taken his life. Daniel, or Frank, struggled to process what this meant. He had died, but now he had a second chance, embedded in a man about to endure the same fire, the same harrowing event. But why? And what was he supposed to do with this twisted rebirth? The answer, he soon realized, was not just in warning people or escaping the blaze. The fire was more than an accident. It was something far darker. Frank's house was different from Daniel's modest one-bedroom apartment, but it felt homely. Warm wood floors, a hint of lavender in the air, and stacks of letters spread across the kitchen table. Days before the fire, everything seemed normal to an outside observer, but Daniel, now Frank, could feel the creeping dread of approaching doom slip under his skin like a low tide. In his new life, the memories of the original Frank Dalton came flooding back, a dedicated firefighter, well-liked by his crew, methodical and cautious, a man haunted by dreams of fire engines burning to ash and people screaming into the void. The fire had overshadowed Frank for weeks before it happened, but he dismissed the visions as stress and exhaustion. Daniel felt the weight of those memories settle heavily on his chest. Compelled by a mixture of fear and determination, he began making plans. First, he contacted his firehouse chief, a gruff man named Harris. "Chief, I need to tell you something," Daniel said with a newfound urgency, his voice catching. "There's going to be a fire. A big one. This place is gonna burn to the ground, and people could die." Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly assuming it was the stress talking. "Frank, you've been on the bottle too much lately. You're spooked. Go home, get some rest." No one believed him. No one would. But Daniel refused to give up. He took to patrolling the neighborhood daily, inspecting old wiring, talking to the neighbors, but no one reported any hazards. Days ticked down, the weight of impending disaster suffocating. As the second night after waking approached, Daniel, as Frank, stared at the ceiling, sweat prickling under his skin. There was something else, an uneasy presence in the house, subtle and intangible, like a whisper beneath the hum of the electric lights. He rose and drifted down the stairs, feeling an uncanny pull guiding his footsteps. The air grew colder near the basement door. He hesitated, then forced the door open. The basement was cluttered with storage boxes and tools, but there was a corner where the shadows were impossibly deep. Something flickered there, a faint, fiery glow that no star or lamp could produce. He stepped closer, the warmth growing against his skin. His flashlight flickered. Suddenly, a whisper hissed from the shadows, chilling Daniel to his bones. "You cannot escape the fire, Frank. It wants you." He jolted back, pounding heart frantic, fingers trembling. What was this? A hallucination? Or something more sinister? His skin prickled with cold sweat. Forgetting fear, he clenched his fists. "I'm not afraid of you." The shadows writhed. The glow brightened into angry embers that hovered like spectral tongues. "You died once. You will die again. The fire will have you." The words etched themselves deep in Daniel's mind. Days passed in a blur of paranoia and investigation. The house felt alive, watching him, something ancient dwelling beneath its foundations. Daniel threw himself into research about the old building's history. He uncovered half-forgotten stories of a man named Elias Crow, a recluse who had lived there decades ago. Elias was a pyromaniac, a tormented soul who perished in a fire that consumed the house long before Frank, or Daniel, had entered it. But the locals whispered darker truths. That Elias's death was not accidental. That his spirit was bound to the place, forever drawn to flames, seeking revenge on those who dared disturb his domain. The fireman in him wanted to believe in science. The horror writer in him wondered if Elias's ghost sought to burn everything to ash once more. Increasingly, the fiery whispers etched themselves into his dreams. Flames caressed his skin, voices screamed in an indecipherable tongue, clawing at him to surrender to the blaze. On the eve of the predicted fire, Daniel felt fractured. His identity splintered between himself and Frank, between the living and the dead, between sanity and madness. The night the fire started was almost surreal. Daniel lay in bed, the house silent around him. The clock ticked toward midnight. A faint scent of smoke nagged at his consciousness. He bolted upright, heart-hammering as alarms blared from the basement. The old wiring had finally failed. He scrambled from bed and raced downstairs, the fiery whispers now screams ricocheting through the walls. Flames erupted from the basement, dancing wildly and licking at the stairs, smoke billowing with toxic fury. Daniel grabbed the fire extinguisher but had barely squeezed the handle when the flames roared to life, pushing him back. Trapped in a blaze far fiercer than he had imagined, moments stretched into hours. The house groaned, the heat unbearable. Daniel ran through the thick smoke toward the exit with frantic desperation. Suddenly, hands clawed at his ankle, dragging him back to the inferno. He screamed, kicking free and rushing out of the front door just as the house began to collapse in a thunderous blast of fire and flame. But Daniel's escape was not over. At the edge of the street, metallic footsteps approached, firefighters from his own crew, led by Chief Harris, who stared wide-eyed at the burning house. "You made it out. You're alive," Harris said, disbelief choking his voice. Daniel looked down at his hands, still trembling. I don't know how. But it wasn't the end. Over the following days, Daniel felt increasingly disconnected from his own body, as though it was no longer entirely his own. The nightmares became more vivid, the fiery face of Elias Crow appearing in the smoke, whispering truths he couldn't unhear. Elias's rage was not only against the house. It extended to anyone who tried to tame the flames. The fire was his voice, his wrath, and his jailer. It trapped souls like Daniel's, condemning them to endless rebirths inside the bodies of those who walked too close to the inferno. Daniel realized the terrible cycle. The fireman's second life was a curse, a ghost trapped in a loop of flames, doomed to relive death again and again. Driven by a desperate will to break free, Daniel sought answers from the town's forgotten histories. He found an old book buried in the library archives, written by Elias Crow's estranged sister, buried in cryptic notes. Within the book was a ritual, a way to sever the bond between the living and the cursed flame. But it required confronting Elias's spirit directly, descending into the heart of the fire itself, where no man dared survive. Daniel resolved to perform the ritual. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air thick with smoke, Daniel returned to the charred ruins of Frank's house. The embers still smoldered among the ashes, and the scent of burning pine filled the air. Armed with the ancient book and a mixture of hope and terror, he stepped over the threshold where the fire once raged. The ground beneath him radiated intense heat, and ghostly flames flickered in the corners of his vision. With trembling hands, he began to chant, words thick with power and dread spilling from his lips. The temperature soared, and the ghostly figure of Elias Crow emerged, burning like a living shadow against a background of flames. "You cannot end what I am," Elias's voice echoed, twisted and wild. "You are mine. I'm not afraid," Daniel shouted, voice strong though heart pounded so loudly it might burst. A maelstrom of fire erupted, swirling around them, an inferno of fury and pain. The chant grew louder, and Daniel could feel the flames clawing at him, burning away the chains that bound his soul. The blaze enveloped him, searing pain ripping through every fiber of his being. Then, in a sudden release like breaking a dam, the fire burned out. Silence hung heavy and deep. The ghostly figure of Elias dissolved into embers drifting away in the wind. Daniel collapsed, gasping for breath, covered in soot and sweat. When he looked down at his hands, they were steady, warm, alive. He had broken the cycle. In the weeks that followed, Daniel returned to his own life, body, and time. The memories of living as Frank remained, a haunting scar on his mind, but also a warning. The fire was never just a fire. It was a living nightmare, an ancient curse tied to a restless spirit, seeking to trap souls in death and destruction. Daniel vowed to honor those lost and to guard the fragile border between life and death, fire and shadow. And sometimes in the quiet of night, when the air smells faintly of smoke and the wind whispers through the trees, Daniel can still hear a whisper on the edge of hearing, a voice from the flames, reminding him that death is not always the end, and some fires burn long after the ashes settle. For more stories, like and subscribe.